Welcome, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
So the Torah reading for this week is Bishalach. Bishalach is the portion that includes the song of the Red Sea that the Israelites sang after they were able to cross the Red Sea and on dry land, and the Egyptians were drowned subsequently in pursuing them. And it's also consequently known as Shabbat Shirah, the Shabbat of song, etc. Believe it or not, we have gotten through a lot of this. It's poetry. The song itself is poetry, and it screams for interpretation. And Rashi has a lot to say about it, and we actually have gotten through pretty much all of it, and we may get to the end of it today. So we'll take a look. We're just finishing up here. Az nivhalu alufei Edom, then the chieftains of Edom were terrified. Elei Moab, Yochazemo Ra'ad. By the way, okay, I'll translate it right. The mighty men of Moab were seized with trembling. Namogu kol Yoshvei Canaan. All the inhabitants of Canaan melted away.
Mm.
They were so frightened. So one thing you notice, and it bears repeating, is the nature of Hebrew poetry, at least biblical Hebrew poetry, is not about meter and it's not about rhyming. It's about something called parallelism. In other words, what is the structure that creates poetry, right? That there's a certain specific and strongly implemented style, and the style that shows Hebrew poetry is something called parallelism. So we had the parallel of Az Nivhalu Elafei Edom, right? The chieftains of Edom were terrified. Parallels idea. Let's see, Ele Moab Yochazeh Murad, the mighty men of Moab were seized with trembling, and Namogu Kol Shvei Klan, again, a parallel statement. And that is the hallmark of biblical poetry. So, onwards. Alufei Edom Ele so these both these groups, in other words, the leaders of Edom and the chieftains of Edom and the mighty men of Moab. So what Rashi notices in the Mechilta, okay, he's picking it up from a much earlier work, the Mechilta, notices that Edom and Moab were not countries that the Israelites were going to try to conquer. They were not going to attack neither Edom or Moab. And so it begs the question, so why were they so afraid? What were they really so afraid of? Right. V'halo lo haya lahem lira. And in fact, there was no reason for them to be afraid, klum, at all. Shaharai, because indeed, lo alehem hulchim, they weren't going to march against them. That is, the Israelites weren't marching against them. So why? Ela mipnei aninut. But it was a feeling of grief, right? They had this feeling of deep grief. Shahayu mitonanim umitzta'arim al kvodam shel Yisrael, because they were grieving and they were sorrowful regarding the honor that was coming to the Israelites. In other words, they were jealous essentially of this amazing event that, by the way, of course, in the entire area, the entire region was aware of what happened at this particular time, and the Moabites and the Edomites were jealous of that. And of course, the Moabites and the Edomites were in some ways related to the Israelites. Edom, we know, are the descendants of Esau, Jacob's twin brother. The Moabites were descendants of Lot, who were, of course, he was Abram's nephew. Namogu, this interesting for word here. So namasu, they melted. See if
Mm.
it's any more. Okay, he gives an example of why he feels this means this, right? There's a psalm, and interestingly enough, when I've looked at the actual reference, this is saying Psalm 75. Ayin is 70, but in fact it's Psalm 65, verse 11. And there it says, Barvivim Temogagena. There's the Nagmogu, right? In other words, you melt the earth, you soften the earth with showers, right? Amru Alain Amru, so these people, that is the Moabites and the Edomites said, Aleinu him ba'in, they thought, right? They thought. Here's an example of Amru, that means they thought, Hem ba'im lechalotenu, they are coming to finish us off, velirash et artzenu, and to inherit our land. So that's another understanding of this, of why they were afraid. They simply assumed that. Tipol alehem. I think we're on to the next verse here. I think we finished. Yes, just making sure. Tipol alehem emata v'fachad. May dread and fear fall upon them, or will fall upon them. Begodel zroacha yidmu ka'avin. In the might of your arm, in other words, with God's might, show of power, they are silent like the stone. Ad ya'avor amcha Adonai, until your people cross over. Ad ya'avor amzu kanita, until this people that you acquired cross over. Now, the fact that it's a parallel, but it's using exactly the same word, it's got this exact same phrase, ad ya'avor, suggests something more than simply parallelism. Okay, so let's take a look. So I think, in fact, this actually means the odd here means when. Okay. Uh, it could mean until, but I think here it means when. Let's take a look at how Rashi handles this. Tipol alehem emata, may dread fall upon them. Okay, and again the mechilta al harechukim. So that emata that refers to the ones who are distant. Upachad, so he says the emata, the dread is on the ones who are far away. Upachad refers to the ones who are close by. Okay. Al hakrovim. Ki inyan shene'emar, as we see, in other words, the idea that people had heard about it. And in the second chapter of Joshua, which is the story of the defeat of Jericho, and the story of the spies, the two spies who went and hid with Rachav, right? Rachav says to the spies, Ki shamanu, for we have heard, et asher hovish, etc. We heard how God dried up the sea. From the Yovish is from the root Yavesh, right? We've heard how God dried up the waters of the Sea of Reeds. So they had heard about it too. Now, Ad Yavor, right? It mentions Ad Yavor twice. Ketargumor, and all Rashi says here is as the Targum goes. So let's take a look at the Targum, right? So here we go. Ad Ye'ibar Amach Hashem, until, O Lord, your people cross over Yat Arnona, the Arnon River. Ad de Ye'ibar Ama, until your people cross over. Tnan, those di Parakta, those that I believe it means whom you redeemed. Yat Yardana, the Jordan. So the Targum understands this Ad Yavor, as referring to both the Arnon, which is mentioned in the course of the book of Numbers, how they crossed over the Arnon to get into the land there, right? And also the Jordan. So that's the implication of these two crossing overs. Kanita, you have acquired. Chibavta misha'ar umot, you hold dearer than other nations. Kechefetz hakanui, like an article which is purchased b'damim yikarim, for that's very expensive, with precious money, shechaviv al ha'adam, which when you buy something that's extremely expensive, you of course want to care for it even more. So, in a way, what it's saying is metaphorically that the fact that God redeemed the Jewish people through the plagues and through the crossing of the Red Sea, in a way, that's how God acquired the Jewish people. Let me explain this. I think the implications and the reason why we're supposed to see as if God had done it today, right, in the Seder on Pesach, we say that every person should look as if he himself or she herself were redeemed from Egypt. And it implies an obligation on our part that we have an added obligation. Human beings have an obligation to serve their Creator for having created the universe, for having given individuals their lives, their very life, and the ability to function, etc., and all the blessings of this world and all the potential of this world. That alone is enough for people to be obligated to serving God. However, the Jewish people have an additional level of obligation. And that additional level of obligation comes about on account of the redemption from Egypt, redemption from slavery. We could take this a step further, but for the time being, to understand that when we refer to the Exodus from Egypt and the miracles that took place, it's our understanding that the level of obligation we actually owe the divine is a higher level of obligation. And in fulfilling that obligation, in doing that, we are, in fact, a really beloved nation. We're beloved because we have the obligation that we were given, if you want to look at it as a privilege, the privilege of serving God through the commandments, through the mitzvot. And the mitzvot are a revelation of the divine will, that we have that, and also that we can bring blessing to the world in this particular way. But imagine to yourself what it means when Jews abandon this. And if you understand it in this context, you can see it as a huge level of ingratitude. That when Jews move away from being devoted to God, it actually is even worse than other peoples who might not. So we live spiritually on a level of extremes. There's the extreme good that can happen that we're given the opportunity to do, but there also is terrible consequences if we choose to move away from it. So, as a very wise rabbi said, whom I learned from, said that the beginning of spirituality, the essence of spirituality, is appreciation. So we look at our relationship to the divine and to the universe, etc., in which we live. Going on, verse 16 here. To amo, this is like a poetic way. To amo, you will bring them, v'tita amo, and you shall plant them, bahar nachalatcha, in the hill of the mountain of your inheritance. This, of course, is an implication or a reference to the temple. Okay. Machon l'shivtacha, again, parallelism, the establishment of your dwelling, pa'alta Adonai, which you have made, O Lord. Mikdash Adonai, the sanctuary of Adonai, konanu yadecha. So it's Mikdash. Actually, Rashi's going to tell us. It's Mikdash, the sanctuary. Adonai konanu yadecha, O Lord, your hands have established it. Let's take a look. If we have anything. Yes. Tivi Amo. You shall bring them, right? Nitnabe Moshe. So them, right? That's interesting. You shall bring them. Moses prophesied, Shelo yikanes la'aretz, that he would not enter the land of Israel, because he's saying them. Lachach lo ne'emar tevi'enu, and that's why it doesn't say you will bring us. Now, there is a comment, there's an editorial, as you can see the parenthesis, there's an editorial comment here that is made by a great Talmudic commentator, the Maharsha, and he says, Nir'eh, you can see, it would appear, shelo yikansu la'aretz, that Moses wasn't just talking about when he said bring them, he was talking on behalf of all the Jewish people, and so that they themselves, that is the Jewish people themselves, wouldn't enter the land. He was prophesying. Why? V'hachi ita behedya, and in fact, this is stated explicitly. Parshat Yesh Nochalim. There's a Perek Yesh Nochalim. There's a chapter in the Talmud that says there are those who inherit. That's the title of the chapter. Daf Kufiyet Yud on page 119. Uva Mechilta, and in the Mechilta, this is this halachic midrash. Habanim yikansu, the children will enter. Velo avot, but not the parents. Af shelo nigzera, despite the fact that the edict had not been set yet, meraglim, of the spies. Remember that whole incident that occurs when they're ready to go in, and where 10 of the spies say they won't be successful, and there's an edict now that that generation is to die out in the wilderness, right? It had not been formulated at that point. At this particular point, they were all going to march in within the space of a year or two. Michol makom, nevertheless, niba, Moses was prophesying, velo yada ma niba, but he didn't know himself. He didn't understand himself what he was prophesying, and this is the Maharshal, right? Shlomo Luria, I think, is his name, Rabbi Shlomo Luria. So going on, machon l'shivtecha, a habitation, right, or an establishment for your dwelling. Mikdash shel mata, and he says the fact that he says your dwelling, the Mikdash, the sanctuary below on earth, the one that was in Jerusalem, mechuvan keneged kisei shel mala. It stands directly opposite the throne that is above, the heavenly throne, asher pa'alta, which you formed. So again, we understand that the city of Jerusalem, right, is that nexus between the heavens, the spiritual, and the earthly. And the idea is that there should be an outpouring of spirituality into this world that would, in fact, create a life for everyone that could be one that was bliss, that was compassion, where there are enough resources for everyone. And in fact, in our prayers, to a very great extent, this is what we're praying for. This vision that it is possible for humanity to live in service to the divine and as brothers and sisters and in a care that we could have such a time. Mikdash, right, a sanctuary. So Hatam Alav, the trope note that is above it, Zakef Gadol. This this is a little bit misprinted. It didn't come out well. There are actually two dots right here next to the line, and that's considered a Zakef Gadol. That's the name of this particular trope note. Lahafrido, and that's to separate it. Me tevat, let's make sure. Me tevat Hashem shel acharav. That it's to separate it from the word that is a noun following. So here's how to read this. Hamikdash, that is, we should understand this. Hamikdash, that sanctuary, asher konanu yadecha Hashem, which you, the Lord, have established. So, because if we didn't read it with a pause there, right? Mikdash Adonai, we would see it as the sanctuary of the Lord, which your hands established. But it doesn't mean the sanctuary of the Lord, or it means the sanctuary. O Lord, your hands established it. That's how we understand it. Going on, let's see here. Okay, here we go. Make sure. I want to find the right place. Okay. Chaviv Beit HaMikdash, the sanctuary, is considered extremely precious. Sha'olam, even more precious than the universe. Why is that sanctuary even more precious than the universe? This is simply from the way this is expressed, he'll tell you, right? She'ha'olam nivra beyad achat, because the universe was created with one hand, right? Meaning with one evidence of power, right? Shneimar, as it says, Af yadi yasda aretz. It says, even or truly my hand established the earth. Umikdash bishte yadayim. But the sanctuary was with two hands, right? So yadecha, your hands, plural. Ve'emata yivne b'shtei yadayim. And when will the sanctuary, in fact, be created with two hands? Bizman she'Hashem yimloch lo'olam va'ed, at the time when God will reign forever. Ve'ad la'atid lavo, and until the future time. Possibly we're talking about Messianic era. We may be talking about beyond the Messianic era. Shekol hamlucha shelo, when all sovereignty will be God's. And at that point, the temple will have that significance of even going beyond the creation of the physical world. And I think the reason for that, if I wanted to try and interpret what that actually means, has to do with the fact that the spiritual element, spiritual reality, actually goes beyond physical reality. And I think that's what it's trying to say, that people will understand and be connected to the Creator on a deeply spiritual level, which goes beyond the temptations of this world. Because if you liked, you could say that the reason for the degree of selfishness and cruelty and stuff has to do with the fact that people don't value spirituality sufficiently, and they think that they can get satisfaction out of the physical elements of this world. Going on. Adonai yimloch lo'olam va'ed, and here we go. Look at that. The Lord will reign forever and ever. Okay. Lo'olam va'ed. So Rashi says we need to look at this grammar here. Here, lashon olamit. The word va'ed here is one word. He says lashon olamit hu. It's an expression of eternity. V'havav bo yesod. And he says the vav is it's a part of the root of the word. But we know that the va, and Rashi's going to point this out, that very often a va means and, right? That it's simply a prefix. But he says that here va'ed is one word, and the vav is part of the root of the word. Lefichach hu petucha. And for this reason, normally it would take a patach that is a short ah sound. Here's a patach right here. Now you notice that this is called a kamatz. But the truth is the only reason it has a kamatz is because it's at the end of a sentence. It's in pausal form. Okay. Aval, but in the case in Jeremiah 29, where it says, Va'anichi hayodea va'ed, right? Where here it's, I am the one who knows and am witness, where the word is aid, and that's not with a vav. That's not, the vav is simply a vahavav bo shimush, and there the vav is a utility. Mutsahi, if you look at that verse, the vav has the kamatz underneath. And there is understood with and witness. But this va'ed, right, does not mean and witness. It means eternal, eternal. And just finishing up the poem, Kiva sus Paro, right? Paro berichbo uvefarashav, for these horses or the horse of Pharaoh, together with his chariots and horsemen, bayam, are in the sea. Let me make sure I've got all the words that were here. Right. For the horse and chariots of the Pharaoh came to the sea. Yes? You may want to mute, right? Vayashev Hashem alehem et mei hayam, and the Lord turned back on them the waters of the sea. Uvnei Yisrael halchu bayavasha betoch hayam, while the children of Israel went on dry land in the midst of the sea. So let's take a look here. Okay. Ki vasus paro. Kasherba, that is to say, when. So the key, which normally we translate as because, here the key means when the horse of Pharaoh, etc., etc. And we will stop right here for today. Oops. Okay. All right, let's see what we can do here. And I'm going to stop the share. Okay. Well, hi. Any comments? Yeah, Mead?
Well, no, I'm catching this in the middle. Obviously, you have been through the Song of the Sea in previous sessions in
Right.
previous years. How do I go about finding the YouTubes on those sessions that will lead me into
Right.
this?
Yes. So I will send you the if
I
you can
have the link
find.
to your YouTubes, but it's a
Okay,
matter
okay,
of digging
okay.
through them.
So if when you do a search on my YouTubes, right? What you do is you do a search on Beshalach. That's B apostrophe
Yeah.
SHA, the way I'm going to spell today's, and that'll bring up all of them. That'll bring up
Okay.
all of them, and then you can look to the first.
Very
Yeah.
good. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, let
Yeah,
me
I've
just
got to
Mordecai,
get
get
the
this.
let me get the sun
I'm
out of your eyes here. Okay. Give me a second. Let me
okay.
do this. Hold on a second.
Mordecai,
Yeah.
I sent you a map, which I saw in a book by Leon Uris, which
Yes.
shows the Exodus.
Yes.
It shows you all the Moab and Edom. It's really very nice.
Good.
You might want to show it to the group
Oh,
another day.
okay. All right. Give me a second, and I'll see if I can find it. Oh, you sent it as a regular attachment on a message, right?
Yeah, I don't know how to do it on here.
Okay,
Is
never
there?
mind. Okay, give me a second, and I'll get it. I'll open it and see what I can do. Second. Okay, here we go. All right, let me see if I can do this. Okay, and plus a snow scene, I see that too. Okay, give me a second and I'll see if I can open it. Okay, good. All right. One
Really
second.
nice.
I'll share it. Yes, it is. Right. Give me a second here. Let's see what I can do. Here we are. Okay, so they're right. Here we go. So this is they're leaving Goshen, right? And they're crossing the Sea of, here's where they say is the Sea of Reeds. So whether or not the Sea of Reeds is part of the Gulf of Suez, I thought this was also known as the Red Sea. In other words, it's called the Red Sea because it's a contraction of the Reed Sea. So, but anyway, down to Mount Sinai. And here's where they start the wandering. Okay, right here you see they're ready essentially to enter the land, and this is where they get turned back and finally get up. So I think they're crossing the Arnon up here somewhere, maybe. I'm not sure. I don't know if they have a picture of the Arnon. So there are some really good maps around here. Okay, all right. Thanks, Morris.
Okay. Okay. See you tomorrow.
Yes, God willing. Take care.
Okay. Bye
All
bye.
right. Bye-bye. Okay. Me, do you have any other questions, or are
No,
you
that's
trying to do that?
I've just dropped right in the middle of this. And
Okay.
tomorrow we're doing a study session with Rabbi Goodman
Right.
over at TBS at noon,
Okay.
and it'll follow Bashala, and I'm sure this is going to come up. So I thought I would do some
Okay.
advanced reading.
Some digging. Okay.
Yes,
Very good. Okay. Yeah. If you have any problems, let me know. But
sure.
I can tell you that'll get you all the bashalas.
Very good.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'll double check myself on my own website. Okay.
Okay.
Take
Good.
care, everyone.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Hi.
David. Yes. Hi.
Oh,
I'm still recording, so do you want me
Yeah.
to stop? I'll stop recording.